Hey everyone, and welcome back to Pulp Hero Audio. In today's video, I am going to be talking about the 1983 animated film Fire and Ice, which I think really fits into this category of sort of pulp. Men's adventure type entertainment. And while I'm going to start off talking about Fire and Ice, that's going to lead to kind of a larger topic overall as far as that kind of animation is concerned. But Fire and Ice, so from 1983, directed by Ralph Bakshi, who also did the animated Lord of the Rings films, and based upon the artwork and also produced by the phenomenal artist Frank Frazetta, very famous for those Conan the Barbarian book covers and other paintings and things like that. So you've got a really great team of Frank Frazetta and Ralph Bakshi here coming together to create this sort of primitive world, near the end of an ice age, as two kingdoms are pitted together, one of fire, one of ice, and you've got primal caveman sort of tribes battling it out. You've got all kinds of creatures. Sorcery, magic is involved. You've got a beautiful woman, a princess, Princess Tigra, that is needing to be rescued, although she has some pretty good moves herself. Our hero, a tribesman by the name of Larn, as well as this mysterious warrior figure named Darkwolf, as they are, battling the forces of this evil wizard king, Necron, and his mother. So, interesting story. But of course, the thing that really sells it is the animation. Is the artistic detail put in to Fire and Ice. And going back and watching this, it just shows how much animation as an art form seems to have declined since then. Now, you would think it would be the opposite, with all of our, computer-generated imagery and things like that. But no, this handmade animation from this time period is just so beautiful. I mean, the amount of work and detail put into this thing, the expression in both the fluid movements of the people, the characters, is just so well done, and it's so human. That's one of the things that I love about it, and one of the things that I miss so much is that these characters, they move and they act and they look human. They seem like real people. It's not this overly stylized thing that they try to do today, and I'll get more into that later. But it's just a beautiful thing to behold, the work and the pride that the animators obviously put into this. And another thing that I think is interesting is that in this movie for, long stretches of time, entire scenes, there will be almost no dialogue whatsoever, because the animation itself is so detailed, so beautiful, so artfully rendered, that the actions, the movement, the expressions of the characters, they tell the story in of themselves. So you don't need a lot of dialogue. And that's something I'll be talking about a bit later as well. Now, Fire and Ice, with its content and, some of the violence and things, definitely wasn't for kids necessarily. But even if you do look at, kids or children's animation, from around the same time period, the early to mid 1980s, when Fire and Ice came out, I think you can see the influence on children's animation, and you can see that even in, so-called kids stuff, there was still this sort of pride taken in the artistry of what they were doing. I think about, something like, say, the Thundercats, which had some of this same sort of detail and beauty in its rendering, the expressiveness of the characters, the humanity of the characters. Even though these are, cat people or whatever, there's still a humanism to them. And so we've gone from that version of the Thundercats to something like what they're giving us now with this Thundercats Roar Thundercats Roar remake that they're doing, which just strips away so much of that humanity, that expressionism, and that detail to be found in this older animation. It's fast, it's cheap. At least that's the way it appears to me. And the difference is just so stark. I mean, you look at the leader of the Thundercats, which I think, is influenced by, images that we see in things like Fire and Ice. You look at Lion-O, the leader of the Thundercats. In the animation, there's such strength. There's power in what you're seeing there. A strength, a power, a masculinity that has been stripped away from boys' cartoons. I don't even know if today you could even get away with calling it a, quote, boys' cartoon, because nothing can be aimed toward boys. So, all the strength, the power, the positive masculine role models, all that has been stripped away to give us this cutesy pie, non-threatening, sanitized version of the Thundercats and everything else, and you see this, not just in animation, but it spills over into other things, toys, as we've got, the Funko Pops are all over the place. Let's make everything cutesy. That seems to be the idea. Let's make it non-threatening. Let's make it all cutesy. Whether it be Funko Pops or video games or animation. Let's make it all cute and non-threatening. Because we don't want a generation of toxic boys. Growing up with things like the Thundercats. Or something like, say, G.I. Joe. Can you imagine G.I. Joe, a real American hero, the cartoon as it appeared in the 80s? Can you imagine something like that even being put out there today, aimed at boys? Something promoting patriotism, pro-military, again, with very human looking characters, where things are not just constantly cutesy all of the time. Something that promotes teamwork and loyalty and these sort of things. I just don't think you would see something like that anymore. Something like G.I. Joe, a real American hero. If they did try to remake it, well, they would probably drop the real American hero part. And again, they would probably all cutesy it up like they've done with the Thundercats, And hey, it's not just the boys that they're doing this as well. Again, going back to the same time period of Fire and Ice, Thundercats, G.I. Joe, one of the icons of girls' cartoons, She-Ra, the Princess of Power. Again, you look at She-Ra as she was rendered back then, she's a very strong, very powerful woman, but still very feminine, classically, beautiful, like our, Princess Tigra in Fire and Ice. She-Ra, has all of those things. So again, we go from that, to what they're giving little girls now, in the modern day with the She-Ra remake, which, just doesn't have that same femininity, the strength, the beauty, the power. It just doesn't seem to be there in the same way that it once did. I know the criticisms. There may be some out there thinking, but this is for kids, It's not like Fire and Ice. That was for, a more adult audience, at least teenagers, or something like that. This is supposed to be for kids, So why do you, a grown man, care about, a kid's cartoon, that kind of thing? It's not for you, after all. And that's fine. I agree. It's not for me. But at the same time, I do care about, what is being fed to our kids. I mean, we have now an entire generation that has grown up on this goofy, non-threatening, cutesy, sort of a Cal Arts style animation, they call it, I believe, with things like Steven Universe and the Fairly Odd Parents and all these cartoons. And I think you can trace a lot of that back to SpongeBob SquarePants. You've got an entire generation raised not on these cartoons that embody strength and power and that kind of thing. Instead, we've got this, it doesn't have the artistry. It doesn't have the human-like movements that you see in Fire and Ice, Thundercats, G.I. Joe, She-Ra, He-Man, things like that. It's all this hyperactive sort of movement. And then there's the talking, okay? Going back again to Fire and Ice, like I mentioned earlier, you had long moments, stretches of time where there was no dialogue, okay? Again, because the images on the screen really told a story in of themselves. But if you look at, modern cartoons starting with like SpongeBob and going from there, it's just this constant talking. It's this mindless, inane blather where they are just yapping non-stop. It never slows down for a moment. So you've got this generation of kids raised on this hyperactive, fast-talking, no attention span, lack of artistry sort of cartoons. And it's like, what kind of, adults will this generation of children end up producing in the long run? Now, I know some might be saying, well, it's a style, it's stylistic. It's a stylistic sort of animation. It's not that old school, where the people look like people sort of thing. And stylized animation isn't all bad. I can think of a couple of notable exceptions of recent years. You had Star Wars, The Clone Wars, and then you had Samurai Jack, which both had sort of their own unique style in the animation, but even with the stylization of everything, you could still see that it was crafted with care, that there was a pride taken in the work. There was a certain seriousness to the stories, to the characters, real human emotion and feeling and things like that have been largely stripped from these goofy, inane, constant chatter, lack of humanity, cutesy pie sort of cartoons that, kids seem to have been bombarded with. So, kind of bringing this back to Fire and Ice, when I see something out there in animation that seems to be kind of a throwback, something that is going back to something like Fire and Ice, that gets me kind of excited. It's something that I want to support. And I see that the makers of Samurai Jack have a new animated series in the works that's supposed to debut in the fall, sometime in the fall of 2019, on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim segment, and that being this animated series Primal, which, if you check out the trailer for that, which is, real easy to find on YouTube and things like that, it looks, really cool. Yeah, it has some of that stylization. It's not exactly in the Fire and Ice style necessarily, but it's definitely in that vein. Again, you can see an expressiveness. You can see a fluidity of movement. You can see a care, a pride, a seriousness that the animators have put into this. And quite frankly, I think we need, or kids anyway, and again, I know it's Adult Swim, so it's not necessarily aimed toward kids, but hey, kids grow up, kids become teenagers, teenagers become adults, and so I think we need more things like this, more things like Primal, more things like Samurai Jack, Star Wars, The Clone Wars, Fire and Ice, and less things like SpongeBob or Steven Universe or Thundercats Roar. these cutesy pie things that don't just treat kids like kids, but they sort of treat them like morons. They treat them like idiots, like oh, you're kids, so we're just going to give you stupidity rather than anything serious, anything with any themes that you can appreciate, that you can grow up with, that can have a real impression upon you, something that you can take with you even into adulthood. Because I can, still look back to things like, Fire and Ice, Thundercats, G.I. Joe, He-Man, Transformers, and there are still things from childhood, that still stick with me to this day, and I think they were a positive influence rather than a negative one. Okay, guys, so that's all I've got. Let me know what you think in the comments about Fire and Ice, or the direction that animation is going in. Let me know what you think in the comments. Be sure and like and subscribe and all that stuff if you haven't. I certainly do appreciate that. And we'll talk to you next time. Later.